For tomorrow?
It's workshop. Are you on the workshop one? Workshop is the one. Oh, and then Joel's on, so that's good.
And open pension. Yes.
Great. Okay, I'll get this presentation up.
Commissioner Condor, can you hear us?
I can.
Oh, good. Thank you for
Me-
being,
Can you hear me?
and little feedback. So it's good for us to test this.
The bad word, all the bad words.
Talk again if you can.
Have you seen the list of two books of noble? I don't know if on there.
Did we lose you, Joel?
No, I can hear you.
Okay.
Culture, yeah, culture's on there.
I think I may need to bring this. There we go. Yeah. Is that okay?
Can you see that PowerPoint?
I was watching the way I
Joel?
do
I
it.
can.
Awesome.
So
Here.
I see, not easy to get. I did.
Serving.
I feel like I'm falling behind. I need to get more chips because you were having chips and you
Do you want to
know how
stop and
nutrition.
redo it?
You
No,
should
no.
have chips with a cookie.
I know, chips with the cookie, because the one person in the room who really knows nutrition
what they're doing.
is eating chips and a
She
cookie.
just gave me this long lecture about how she doesn't discipline herself then.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I've been watching.
We could. You want, what?
Are you watching her diet?
Yeah, closely.
You can eat it.
Hey.
Yeah, but I can do it.
No, she's done something else.
I know. That's when we're good, Doug.
You made it. I did. Good to see you.
You see how tan his hand got from being on the river.
It makes me feel better. If you know so much. And you still.
And it's
live
just
like
him, right?
You're mortal. The rest of us.
Okay.
Then it's kind of encouraging for the rest of us,
Um,
Bob, that are not doing it right.
Do you want us to keep going?
Okay.
All right, we'll go ahead and get, Joel, you can hear us okay, but when you talk, we're getting a little bit of feedback. So maybe if you can just not sing, but just say something real quick so Doug can get a better sense of what he's doing is helping our audio with you.
You asked me to go ahead and speak.
Beautiful.
That sounds way
Oh,
better.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Good job, Doug. All solved. Yay. Yeah, no, it's perfect. Nice to see you and have you with us. Sorry you're not feeling well.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's a tough one.
Okay, we'll go ahead. And
Screen on Zoom.
oh, okay.
There's somebody who can make it work.
That's
On Zoom.
So let's just do it this way. from now on.
Okay. Do I still just do? Yep. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, I think we are ready.
Yeah.
Cherry Hill, Director Assumption Commissioners, good afternoon. Thanks for making time today for workshop around the real property policy. If you remember in February, I brought this to you as an informational agenda item. From that, I took the feedback from that meeting and I've incorporated that here, and I thought it would be good to go through that again, just to see if there are some other adjustments that you'd like to see. And then I'm hoping that after the workshop today, I'll run back to the hotel room and put my presentation together tomorrow for adoption of the policy. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick it off. Here's a quick overview of what I'm hoping to cover today. I wanted to talk a little bit before we get into the policy and disposition criteria itself. I wanted to talk a little bit about policy and procedure. I'm going to share both of those things with you today, but I think it's important to kind of differentiate between the two. And then I'll briefly go through the policy background again, through the 4 draft disposition criteria. And then at the end, I was going to show you a couple of different versions of the draft disposition workflow or procedure, just so you can get a sense of what the team has put together. One is really complex, and then they distilled it down for me, so it's a little easier to follow too. So I'll show both of those to you as well. So just kind of a quick high-level overview of the difference between policy and procedure. I think of policy as kind of setting the vision or being the philosophy of the agency around a certain topic. It's really broad, often talks about principles or kind of overarching goals or values of an agency or a certain subject, as the procedure is very tasky. It's like checking the box step by step on how policy may be implemented or carried out. And so I share that with you because one of the things as we kind of talk through the policy itself is making sure that we don't get too specific in the language within the policy, that a lot of that's going to live in the procedure, which is why I wanted to share the procedure with you as well today. And one other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll mention this in the business meeting tomorrow, clearly disposition of a state park property is a pretty sensitive topic. It definitely kind of creates some emotions for folks. And I know I've had a phone call from a concerned citizen. I think Lisa's also had one that, because, you know, they've kind of gotten wind of some of our financial outlook for the agency, and they're concerned that we're going to turn around and want to sell park property to help make up that difference. And I just want to be clear that that is absolutely not the reason that we're having this discussion. I wish, again, I know I mentioned this at the informational item in February. I wish I would have incorporated this when we did the acquisition policy a couple of years ago. But really what, you know, the policy itself hasn't been updated since 1991. And the idea here is to give you updated tools that you need to be able to make the decisions around disposition. And kind of the flip side of that, I think of it as it's our own internal for the agencies guidelines to help you in making those decisions, so that, you know, we're both kind of on the same page, so that when it gets to you, we've gone through all of these processes and we agree on the kind of, again, the philosophy behind why we might be disposing of a piece of property. The other thing I want to mention, we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, is this is not, I guess, think about this not only as moving a park property out of the system, but it's for things like easements and those sorts of things as well, which are probably a lot more common than actually disposition of a park property. So again, quick policy background. The last time that this policy was updated was in 1991. And I think you have that in your packet for tomorrow, and it reads much more like procedure. And so again, this is trying to get the philosophy of the agency around that criteria. The acquisition policy, as you know, was updated in 2011, and then through a series of workshops, we were able to update that and adopt it in 2023. So the idea behind the workshop and then the creation of this new policy is really to combine both disposition and acquisition into one policy. So into the 4 criteria, I can go through these in detail, but what I was planning on doing first was addressing where there were comments at the informational item in February, and showing you where we've made adjustments. And then also we've gotten a couple of letters, one, I think, from the Oregon Coastal Alliance. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what some of their recommendations were and whether or not they were incorporated or not, and why. So the first item there, you can see I put an asterisk up under the mission impact near statewide significance. We had some conversation about that at the informational item in February. I tend to agree with Commissioner Berger that it's the commission's role to decide what that is, rather than, you know, to create a more specific definition around that, but I just wanted to make sure that we were kind of all on the same page around the issue of statewide significance. The other reason I bring that up is I did have a letter during the February workshop with a request to not have statewide, but have significance in there so that it would include things like regional and local significance. But again, I think based on what the state park system represents, that it would be, you know, parks and properties with statewide significance. So I just wanted to kind of check in with you all on that one. You look like you might have a question, Commissioner Grasby.
What's the difference for you?
The difference for me would be something, I'll try and think of some examples. So Silver Falls, say, versus something like Cascadia, right, that we ended up moving out of the system, or Smith Rock. I mean, clearly when you get to Smith Rock State Park, you know, there's no kind of question there. There's almost an emotional response that that's a park with statewide significance. So I think it's the Kam Wah Chung is another one. I mean, there are so many that are the gems that kind of represent different pieces of the state of Oregon.
I guess what I'm struggling a little bit about is, and I'm struggling for an example, but
Mhm.
when you think of something that's really important in the community,
Mhm.
to me, that makes it statewide significant simply because it's important to a unique part of our state.
Yeah.
I've said for years, being unique in Oregon is not unique.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you only focus on the broad picture, I wonder if we miss opportunities.
And I think it's a great point, and I think it's a good question. And I think in those situations where there is something with more of that local or regional significance, that's where we start working with our partners, whether it's a county system, state system, recreation district, to work on them, whether it's with acquisition or development because of the grant opportunities that we have and pass through. It's a great question though. And again, I think that having in the statewide significance leaves that up to this group to discuss and decide on.
Commissioner, that's kind of what I had in mind when I said this is our job. Because you're right, every piece of Oregon is important,
Mhm.
very important to all of Oregon in some ways. But that cut, I think of that ultimately in this policy, what we as a commission in whole decide is really good, the cut. Because we are the people who are charged with that in my mind, not the staff, It's the tough part. And we may not agree on it,
Mhm. Absolutely.
okay? But I really believe that's our job, basically. To make those really hard decisions.
You can see-
You're just looking at me waiting to comment, right? Right?
Well, I saw you move your mic. So I thought you-
Well, no, I am comfortable with the statewide significance language, and with all of these as components of that, understanding that this commission handles these things. I did want to hear what Commissioner Grasty had to say on this, because I think to some extent, I feel like you know, you, Steve, are from part of the state that sometimes is a little undervalued from people on this side of the Cascades, to put it mildly. And so what might be perceived widely within your part of the state might be thought of as statewide significance there, but people on this side of the Cascades may or may not necessarily instantly see that. Now, that means that people bringing forward proposals, for example, from your part of the state may be wanting to, you know, advocate for those, explain why they do sort of meet that statewide level of significance. Anyway,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying that I have any particular conclusion on that. I was saying that I was really curious to hear what you, Steve, were going to say about this, with that in mind, because I think that's kind of a subtext to your question, if I'm not mistaken.
So we may have an opportunity tomorrow in executive session to go a little further into this discussion. Okay? So enough said, but
there's I worry about that underrepresented, particularly
But the events of the last few days when I've been out and where nobody is, although it's recently been discovered. It's, yeah. And there's part of this,
Mhm.
that uniqueness is really, locally important. And I think as long as Commissioner Berger makes a point, as long as this board does its job and says that is something
Yeah.
that's valuable to all
And
of
I-
us.
It just occurred to me too, so this is related to moving something out of the system versus moving something into the system. Do you know what I mean? And so I think if something came, again, that's for this body to decide on. But if something from, that for Southeast Oregon came to this commission to acquire, that's a different conversation. So anyways, yeah.
Mhm. Right.
Okay.
But and it's,
sorry.
maybe this is a question for the other Steve, but I just think that within the context of this policy, because of our mandate statewide,
Yes.
fits that mandate.
Yes.
The commission has the ability to interpret that in terms of local and regional significance. But I think if we change that language, if I'm not mistaken, we start to kind of get into the fuzzy edges of our mandate a little bit by that kind of term and policy. I might be wrong, but I think it's a point I'm factoring into my own level of comfort that we will still capture those local and regionally significant cases, both with acquisition but disposition as well through the deliberation of the commission.
And there's a reason why we are from all over the state deliberately.
Yeah.
Right,
We aren't all based in the same,
right,
and that is by design to reflect.
right.
And I think too, some of the review process that would take place in the procedure, having cultural resource review done of a property, natural resource, all of those things are, again, part of the procedure
Again,
that are
it's
going to
just
help
put up- if you
define
had a
that level of
challenge, would
statewide
somebody come back and
significance,
say,
whether a property's coming in or out. And again, I'll kind of show that in a bit.
And this just gives you guys have practiced
Okay.
this
Mhm.
already with Joseph Stewart, Cascadia, Fort
Mhm.
Yamhill. Like this is just giving you the criteria to have that debate
Yeah.
about a particular property as it comes up. It's not marking each one to say this one is of significance, this one is not. It's
Right.
we'll have the conversation when the property, if somebody approaches us and says, we would like to manage that property on behalf. You're gonna have that conversation like you have. It's just much better criteria for you to use that's
Yeah.
not 30 years old.
Yeah. Okay, the other asterisk that I have in there, notes from February is on the last bullet, disposition of real property where compensation is less than market value, so including things like transfers and exchanges, should include appropriate deed restrictions and reversionary clauses. And the word, I guess, that I want to highlight there is should, because I think as we saw in the transfer of Fort Yamhill, the Grand Ron could not have accepted that in the way that they did because of the BIA's requirements of not having deed restrictions on a property deed. But I just wanted to definitely note that because historically, and I think in most cases, and again, it'll get into it a little bit more in procedure, is that we have, if we were transferring a property to another entity, a city or a county, which is what we've primarily done, then it does include those deed restrictions that the property stay open to the public and be used as recreation, or it reverts back to the agency. Again, the exception being with tribes, depending on how they can receive that property and deed it.
Does that remind me, does that should replace a must or a,
Shall, yes.
Shall.
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Is there any advantage to keeping the shall, but then adding a little clause at the end that says shall do this except under circumstances meeting X,
And broaden it.
whatever X is?
Yeah.
I just asked that out loud.
Yeah. Or we could,
And I don't have the answer myself, but I just sort of,
So
putting
forgive
that
me
out
for
there.
playing devil's advocate
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
little bit here, but we ever had to enforce that, the reverse? And what would that look like?
I'm gonna turn around and phone a friend real quick. Yeah.
Come on up. Yes. She's like, yes, I was ready for this. I was born for this moment.
That has been exercised. I don't know at what state park, but right here in Jackson County in Medford, with our Land and Water Conservation Fund program, there was it's kind of a weird process, but there was a land and water grant given to Jackson County, and then they had an agreement, sent it to the city of Medford. There were some activities. It was near a school. It was determined were not recreational, as being used for school uses. And so Jackson County did have in their agreement this reversionary clause. They said, we're going to take it back because you're not meeting the Land and Water Conservation Fund requirements. And then actually they sold it. So, so they also, you know, do need to replace that property at some point, but those are the kinds of examples where I've seen that done in a lease agreement. With a lot of our grant agreements, we would require that if someone we're granting to can't keep it open for public recreation for the required amount of time, that they need to have another public entity that could take it over. And I've seen that done several times, and that's why we do it, just to make sure it stays in the public's outdoor recreation use, and it works well.
I guess I'm thinking about, I mean, there's so many properties that we have that we inherited from ODOT and others, and that go back to 50s, 60s. I was just reading an agreement that was like Department of Interior transferred land to the state in the 50s, that Roseburg is now trying to figure out how do we deal with this. And so I have some concern a little bit about, you know, this, and this is so vague that I actually don't think that a future commission is going to look at this and be like, oh, we have to have a park. We have to ensure that it has to remain a park forever. But I do have a concern about if we applied that standard for paying under market for a piece of property that may not actually serve that community in a park setting any longer.
Yes,
You know,
yeah.
there's so many communities that have grown up that are so different than they were 70, 80 years ago. And so in perpetuity of a park other than LWCF,
Right.
maybe doesn't make sense when we're thinking about disposition of a piece of property.
Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at the agenda. I think we have one tomorrow that we'll probably talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that same thing.
Yes.
Is that the one you were
Yes,
referring
that
to?
is
Yeah.
what I'm thinking
Yeah.
through, but yeah,
Yeah.
there's others. I mean,
Yeah.
there's others around the state that communities are starting to find that
Mhm.
have some deed restrictions that were placed that may not make sense anymore. And
Yeah. So I would just want to make sure. So does that, am I
think this
interpret
is
that like
so
you're,
vague
oh,
that
okay.
it doesn't actually say, it, you know, should include appropriate deed restrictions and reversionary clauses. It doesn't say it must stay
Mhm.
a park
Mhm.
Right.
in perpetuity
Mhm.
or, you know, whatever that is. And,
Yeah.
and it gives flexibility to the commission and the staff to
Yeah.
decide what those deed restrictions actually are
Would be.
Yeah,
that are important
right.
moving forward.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, it
Thanks,
doesn't have
Michelle.
to stay in park use in perpetuity. It can be some educational use or some other,
Right.
Mhm.
some other function. Right, right.
We can come
How do you feel?
back to that too if we need to. Oh,
Mhm.
okay, the next criteria was strategic objective. The only note I had here from our last meeting in February was there was language in here where it says, here, let me see if I can.
Mhm.
It was right up here where it talks about
Mhm.
unintended public use, inadequate access to law enforcement resources leading to staff or visitor safety issues. I don't have the version from February in front of me, but it was confusing because it talked about law enforcement, and then in a separate bullet, it talked about staff or safety visitor issues. And Chair Hill, you had brought up that it just didn't read right, and so that was the attempt to try and clarify the language there. Because it was really just showing that, you know, if there's a property where we're not able to have law enforcement show up, or it's 4 hours away and there's issues with staff or visitor safety, that was something that we would look at in terms of potentially disposing of a piece of property.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it doesn't say they're gone in those cases. It just
Right.
It might be considered.
Exactly. That's, it's a great point. All of these are just considerations that would be used to decide, to weigh the scale, kind of.
So for you, Vicky, this is Holman.
Yeah, I've been thinking about all that. Yes, I have been, and deed restriction.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did not have any other comments from the February meeting on strategic objective. Let's see, I think I need to do it this way. Hold on. The next is urgent opportunity. I didn't have any comments from our February informational item. I just wanted to note that this criteria really, in terms of disposition, highlights a couple of things. This hinges on, to me, the sense of urgency in a disposition would only hinge on if we were receiving something, that there was an urgency that if we didn't act quickly, we might lose the opportunity on that exchange. It's hard to think of a good example where an transfer a property out of the system that there would be a lot of urgency behind that, because I think there needs to be, you know, we need to be kind of careful and really methodical about how we do that. So really, this just hits on that exchange. And the last of the criteria is engagement. I have received a couple of different comments, and I think we talked about this at the meeting in February, is the idea around local support and local engagement, community engagement. And so this entire criteria kind of highlights that, I think. But I wanted to just add one more, a little bit more specific piece. And so it's in the disposition policy that you have. It is under collaboration and partnership. It's on page 7, item 2B. And what it does is add that last sentence that public participation is an integral part of real property transactions. Because I think either way, disposition or acquisition, that we need to make sure that we're publicly engaged.
I'm happy to see that in there. I just think that setting a high bar for public participation is important.
Yes.
Disposition because of its unique sensitivities.
Yes.
And clearly for acquisitions as well, for all of it, for related but slightly different reasons.
And one of the things that before Chris Havel left, that he and I talked about, and we will, once we kind of get the dust settled on the policy and get the procedures going, is adding, similar to how we do kind of rule review on our website, is we'll have those lists of acquisitions that we're actively engaged in, and then in the event of a disposition, so that, because right now this is kind of the only place that people hear about it. And so again, I think to up our public participation, having it on the website would be a little bit better.
As I look at this and think through it, what's your definition for community?
So I'm going to go back to the criteria, because it talks a little bit more about, or maybe it's, hold on, maybe it's not in that one. There's one, sorry, I should know this kind of inside and out, but that it talks about local communities being cities, counties, other agencies, tribes. I mean, it pretty much calls out the, you know, anybody that we would be working with. Did you have a specific example in mind?
So I'm focused on French Glen, okay?
Okay.
And thinking you have an unincorporated area, is that the community? What's that?
So there, I think My experience in French Glen is that we have done both the community of French Glen and the county, Harney County, have both been involved in those conversations. I don't know that we've really done one without the other. It's pretty much been combined. And so every one is a little bit different, I think.
Sure.
You know, but in that specific example, it would be both, unincorporated or not. Any other questions or comments before I jump over to the okay, this one I'm just going to show you quickly, and the real estate services team doesn't know I'm going to show this to you, but it'll just show the complexity of the it'll just show you the complexity of the process that they go through before it even comes to you all, that the agency goes through. I don't think the type is so small that I don't think you'll be able to even read it, but that's not the point. The point is to see how complex it really is. Oh,
That's complicated.
it's good. Oh, let's see here. Sorry. Oh, I'm not able to get that to come up very well. It worked on my computer. Okay, here we go. Give me just a second. It's impressive, which is why I want to share it with you. Okay. So this just, again, gives you a little bit of a sense when we get a proposal in, whether that be internally, externally, the process it goes through, you can kind of see right here. This is just preliminary with our kind of our specialists around natural resource, cultural resource, historic resources, the review that takes place. It's a little bit higher level in that initial review before it would come to exec team as like, so is this something that we really feel like we want to move forward with? Oops. Gosh, sorry. This is tough. I may just skip that. Anyways, but again, it at least gives you a little bit of a sense. I don't even know where it went. And then, so I'll go through this in a little bit less detail, but you know, that first piece that I showed you, there are like 5 of those afterwards. I'll try and do a better job for the business meeting tomorrow. I'll work with that a little bit. It actually seemed to work fine on my computer, but I think Doug might have to give me a tutorial. Oh, okay. Let me try one more time, because I do think it's important, again, just to kind of see the complexity of it. Take a second load here. I might be able to go back to, gosh. I think I lost it. You know what? Here, I'm going to do this and try one more time. Sorry. I just want to underscore the amount of process that we go through internally. It's not a light decision. And again, whether that's a transfer of property out of the system or an easement, it's very complex. Okay. Okay. I mean, just be really careful, maybe. But... Okay. Thank you. No, thank you. Just have to be very gentle. Okay. So once we do kind of that cursory or high level overview, we have a project manager that's assigned to it, checks with the field, checks with our state park historian, archaeologist, planning, design, just to make sure that this is something worth considering further. It goes to exec team. Then we can respond back, and you'll see throughout these, this means no, we need to stop. It's either a property that has deed restrictions, or there, you know, some things that would prevent us from even bringing it to the commission. So anyways, again, I'm not going to go through entire detail, but that gives you a sense of the process we go through. Okay. So this is, thankfully Tabitha put this together for me, so it was in terms that Matt Rippey could understand. So again, it just goes through, a proposal comes in, we gauge initial interest within the agency, we start doing some data collection internally and analysis. We kind of document decisions along the way, whether or not, you know, it's something that the agency feels like we would continue to move forward with or not, and why, and then go back to that external proposer. We start developing a communication plan, identifying partners, local government consultation, tribal consultation, community outreach plan. To your question earlier, Commissioner Grasty, this is where a lot of that stuff lives, is, you know, putting together a community outreach plan. So again, back to your example of French Glen, it would be both within that community and then the broader county. We start looking at any grant obligations that we might have, any leases or agreements, property due diligence, so things like deed restrictions and resource impacts. And then move forward with any appraisals or site testings that we might have to do. And then we would bring it to the commission for presentation and DAS, and then move towards disposition. And then you can see on the right there what this includes. So it includes transfers, exchanges, sales of property rights, lot line adjustment, easements, auctions, sales, and other dispositions.
So the procedure is identical, whether it's a fee simple sale or a transfer, for example, to a local government. It basically, procedurally, it's the same.
Yes, I think where it may not, and I'll call on folks that know more behind me, but I think where it wouldn't be quite as in-depth is, say, with an easement. I think we were, as an
Right.
example, the easement we did at Ontario Wayside recently.
Right.
You know, and that was actually an existing easement. It just hadn't been recorded. So I think, but for some of the larger property, a transfer, exchange, those kinds of things, that's the process that we
Right.
follow. Yeah.
Because I assume that how certain resources, for example, affect those decisions depend a lot on what that chosen target may be.
Yes.
Just running through hypothetical scenarios as you're speaking, I'm thinking, okay, let's say there is an archaeological site of some significance on the property. If we're transferring title to a tribal government, no problem at all.
Yeah.
If we're opening it up for public, for sale, for a bid.
Yep.
It's a slightly
would
different
be
set of variables. The chemistry is different on that. And the same with, you know, natural resource sensitivities as well. Same kinds of things exist, whether, for example, we're transferring it to a local government or a nonprofit, for example, that has a mandate for protecting that category of resource,
Right.
as opposed to just making it available on the market for sale.
Yes.
So how does that factor in at all procedurally? Or is that just kind of this part of the original cogitation at the beginning of the process?
It does. And for those properties that we would move towards selling, they would go on to the non-essential parkland list, non-essential property list. We have, I think we maybe have one or two properties on there. Like, it's very, very rare that we
Right.
put something on that list. And it truly, I actually cannot off the top of my head probably come up with a good example. I can't even think of the one that's on there. But it's a very, very rare thing.
Yeah, I
Because
appreciate
of
that. I
exactly
guess I'm
what
just
you-
thinking hypothetical scenarios. Again, as it goes through the process of
Yes.
internal review,
Yeah.
and you run it by the resource specialists
Yes.
and so on, and looking at what's there and determining levels, again, like, for example, an archaeological site, and it's like degrees of significance. of
Absolutely.
How sensitive it is. And then that, I think
Yeah.
it factors in then to the decisions about the appropriate methods of disposition
Yeah.
available to us.
And again, those are the things that would come to this body to decide, those.
Yeah.
If we had a property, say that we were looking to move out of the system, we would share the natural resource information, the cultural resource, all of those things
Right.
to help
Right.
gauge that decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's kind of two layers to
Well-
that review. Again, there's that initial kind of high level cursory review by those specialists. And then if it's like, this looks like something that may move forward, then there's a much more in-depth review
Right.
of those things.
Right.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other
No,
questions or thoughts?
thank
Okay.
you, Matt.
Yeah,
for
thank
the
you.
work on this.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the guidance, and the work is kind of everybody back behind me. Thank you.
If he wasn't, and you didn't. But guess what?
I was wondering about when that's happening. Okay.
I'm not sure what.
No. Yeah.
That was the best. That was the best piece of advice we've ever gotten. If I have enough coffee.
We'll buy you a Starbucks.
I was thinking it was.
It was just the presentation folder, I thought.
Did you take that picture?
The one I thought of, maybe.
She said like wood pull up there earlier. They're not our property, so now I'm like, I'm not sure. Hey Doug, where is that location? That waterfall?
Is that White River?
Oh, okay. Christmas.
Oh,
Oh.
that's on federal land, right?
Yeah, like these aren't, most of
Mhm.
these haven't been us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's that place. My nephew.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen plenty of people do that stuff online.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's because of my nephew.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You can say Washington, yeah. Well, even I'm like, they're not state parks, where are they? Yeah.
Okay. So. Director Assumption, Chair Hill, members of the commission, Katie Guthier here to talk about our best practices. And thank you for filling out the best practices survey. We are, whenever you do it is great. What we're going to talk about, we're going to just do a recap of the survey, kind of the why we do it, and review the report, discuss it, answer questions, and then talk about some of the comments. And if we need new measures, there are some that are required. And then the commission can also add measures if there are other things that you would like to add, and then we'll be done. So we will not keep you away from the sun if you want to do that. The best practices were developed jointly by the Legislative Fiscal Office and DAS as a requirement in the 2007-2009 biennium for all boards and commissions that either have an independent budget or independently appoint an executive director or hire an executive director. So that's why you get the pleasure of filling one out and doing it every year. So there are a requirement every year for a board or commission. The process that you go through is to independently do the assessment. And then we answer the questions, any questions about the assessment in a work session. Look over the report. You have the opportunity to reevaluate if you want to change any of your answers. You can reevaluate and change answers. And then we act. You will adopt the formal assessment during the business meeting tomorrow. And then we submit a report to DAS with the final assessment. And it's included in our budget presentation every biennium. And we report on it as part of our key performance measures every year. So it's on our website. In the way that we assess, there are 15 measures that are part of the required best practices. You may remember that there were 16 questions because the commission has added one. The final question about property acquisition was one that the commission had added at some point. So you have 16 questions. And for the requirement, the way that it is presented, meet or exceed is a yes. And that's what we're kind of tracked is the yes or no. So meet or exceed is the yes answer. So we were going to start with looking at the 16. Based on everybody's answers so far, we did have passing scores, but we did have questions in 3 areas. So we were going to look kind of at the answers so far, and then we'll go through each of the question areas. And we'll kind of start going through them, but we'll spend more time going through where the questions are. You all thought the executive director's performance expectations are current. The executive director receives the annual and monthly performance feedback. There were some questions there, so we'll go back to that after we go through all of them. Agency mission and high-level goals are current and applicable. The board reviews annual performance progress report. The board is, and feel free, if you have questions, I don't need to necessarily read this to everybody, but if there are things that you have questions or if you want to interject something, feel free. The board is appropriately involved in the review of key communications. The board is appropriately involved in policymaking activities. And then another one where we'll talk about the agency's policy option packages are aligned with the mission and goals. And the board reviews all proposed budgets every other year. So that's the first 8. And then the next, the board periodically reviews key financial information and audit findings. The board is appropriately accounting for resources. The agency adheres to accounting rules and other relevant financial controls. Board members act in accordance with their roles as public representatives. The board coordinates with others where responsibilities and interests overlap. Board members identify and attend appropriate training sessions. The board reviews its management practices and ensures best practices are utilized. And then this is the unique one to our agency, is the board approves property acquisitions and dispositions in a manner consistent with goals and policy. So unless there are other questions, if we wanted to just touch bases on the ones that were questions, the executive director receives regular performance feedback. And we had shared an example that the most recent evaluation was complete by the chair in July of 2024, which included updated priorities, and the chair communicates with the director informally to provide performance feedback. But if there's additional information anyone wants to share.
I'll be happy to fill in on some of this too. So typically the commission has done an evaluation annually recently the governor's office has started requiring a more comprehensive review that's sent out to state commissioners, county commissioners, people that Lisa works with. And this is called a 360 review. This was done this year. And so I decided it probably doesn't make sense for the commission to also do a secondary review at this point. I will sit down with Barry or Betsy, somebody, to go through those results with Lisa and as well as look at, anything else that's going on this year. Next year, we will take a look, I think, as a commission of what our review process is, because I feel like a lot of those questions are useless in a lot of ways. And I think that we all should have some input on what those look like and kind of relook at what that performance review standard and metrics are. And so I'd like to have a broader discussion of what that looks like among commissioners. Once we have folks settled in, I know.
Sounds like a great idea. And we hope you enjoy yourself.
We have some new folks coming on. So, in the past, we've had some kind of like check the box questions that didn't really seem to fit very
I
well
agree.
with outcomes. And so, that's where we're at. So for those who are not sure, I think when I first started, we didn't have a not sure box. We had didn't do it. And I didn't know if we had a review or not for some of these. So I'm glad we have that not sure box now too, so we can talk through some of these things. That's great.
Our position is interesting with regard to Lisa's position with the governor and the rest of the state government. It's easy for commissions to say we're unhappy, but there are lots of other constituencies that have to do with her performance besides us, and that's correct. Because sometimes boards get bought into people and those people aren't necessarily good, but the board's bought. And so I think it's time for us to review this. And I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I felt,
Yeah.
Chris is transitioning off and we've got an opportunity to look at this in a more comprehensive way.
Yeah, I think that's a very good.
Curiel, I appreciate the words you just said. I've been trying to figure out how to say this. First off, an apology, I'm the last guy to fill in the form. I just did and marked all the boxes to the left, but this gets mundane after a while and repetitive. It's really, so backing up and taking a look at it, I would tell you if I was testifying to the legislature today, I would say this is the best agency and we have the best director. I don't have any doubt about that. But this doesn't feel like much of a review.
Yeah. And I will, I agree. I agree. And I will now open up and confess that for 8 years, I've kind of been feeling the same way, like we need to revisit this and we go through the motions with it, but it does feel like it could do a better job of this sort of articulating high level goals and helping nudge us in the direction continuously of high level goals and in a way that maybe we haven't been able to achieve with this particular instrument. We get there through other mechanisms, but this instrument, I don't know that it's been getting us there. Yeah.
You'll hear more.
Yeah.
Sure.
And we do communicate regularly.
And yes,
whether
yes.
we're
And
excited or
Lisa and I
not.
do talk on a
Yeah.
very,
I'm
very.
just like, I'm over my skis. Do you have my bag or are you pushing me down the hill?
Good. Well, it sounds like we've talked through that one. The second one with questions, unless anybody has any more thoughts. The second one with questions was around the agency's policy option packages are aligned with the mission and goals. And this one probably had some questions because we didn't really have any policy option packages this year. Without additional funding, typically policy option packages we have our current service level budget, and then a policy option package would be something, if we're going to have extra funding, it's how we would propose to spend that extra funding. We didn't have extra funding, so we really didn't propose any policy option packages with this budget. So you didn't really see any policy option packages. There are a few, like grant carryover was a policy option package that we have on an ongoing basis because of the way we budget. But in the past, we've had policy option packages when we increased the number of hours of seasonal staff we had, that was a policy option package from the 23-25 biennium that we're currently in. That was a policy option package that we had. When we've increased the number of positions that we have, that goes through a policy option package. I don't know, Lisa, if you have.
No, I would assume probably for Betty and Melissa being newer, like we didn't do that this time, so that could have raised questions. I don't know who answered what to which thing, but it was just a space for you guys to talk about what that would look like. Policy option packages are things in addition to the current service level budget, and we're not in a place to be adding right now. We're trying to maintain, so that was, I don't know whose question it was or what more you needed. Hopefully they come back next biennium.
And then the final question was the agency adheres to accounting rules and relevant financial controls. And that one, I think the director was going to cover.
Yeah, so we don't bring a lot of this to the commission, and I don't think we share. And so we're going to have Stephanie do a work session at the next meeting and start talking about some of the amazing things the Central Business Service function does. But we literally just got in the mail, I think, last week, the Gold Star Award from DAS Accounting. So we adhere to, between our audits and our requirements through the Department of Administrative Services and the Oregon Accounting Manual, and the statewide accounting, what's SABRS? I can't remember the SABRS anyway. So we adhere to all of those, and we get the little gold star every year. So we can bring that to you so you know that, but.
And I sit on an audit.
Oh, yeah, in our audit committee.
I would like to say that.
That one's coming up too. So we do have Vicky, who's been on the audit committee. Liz is on the audit committee. So we do have folks that are sitting there, and we try more so to focus on our performance issues there and let Secretary of State and DAS look at our financials. But
Any questions with these three questions?
this is your chance to ask questions if you didn't understand them.
Hey, I have one question just with the options of, like exceeds, meets, not sure. Is there any differentiation at all at any point in the exceeds and meets, or are they just collapsed into a yes?
They're just collapsed into a yes.
Either meet or you don't.
This is the legislator's attempt to get a generalized review over a number of agencies. And if you look at it and you say, God, I don't dig down into that accounting thing. Is that my job? You'd lose your mind. But there are other commissions where maybe that's the most important thing they do. And I don't like these kinds of instruments, but I understand its purpose is to have the legislature and the fiscal DAS receive the same information instead of, well, they reviewed this way and they reviewed that way and they covered this and they covered that. So you can take it for what it's worth, okay? Which probably isn't a lot, but that's what they're trying to do. And applaud the attempt because it's tricky.
So the other area we wanted to touch were questions, and that's really where we can have a more substantive conversation, are areas where you think that the commission could improve or could, it could be either we can add our own best practices or just look at changes in our practices. So we don't necessarily have to add a measurement tool, but have a conversation about changes around practices of the commission. So the first one was around public outreach opportunities and what we're doing currently, and if there are areas where you would like to see changes.
Are you talking about the commission itself or the agency?
Right, this would be commission
This
itself.
is the commission itself, so this is something the commission would have to not direct, but do. Just be
To be
sure you're
you.
what you're asking yourself.
Yep.
And currently it is that we offer a public comment opportunity and take comments in writing or at the beginning of the commission meetings.
Mhm.
I think this is an important discussion for a new board,
Mhm.
really.
Agree.
Anybody have any initial thoughts or comments that you want to make before we move on this piece?
You know, it is interesting thinking about this and in hindsight, I would tell you that easily 95% of that small population in Eastern Oregon has no idea that I'm a park commissioner.
I don't care.
Yeah, so until there's controversy and then they will absolutely know.
Oh, yeah, they'll know.
And
They'll find
maybe
it.
there's a way to be ahead of that, so it's a good conversation for the future.
Mhm.
And I'm a huge proponent of public testimony and letting people come in and pound the table in front of us.
Right.
Even though it's hard sometimes, but it's something that I always value and sometimes you gotta do more of.
Yeah,
But then they repeat and repeat and repeat and, you know,
right,
and I don't have an answer.
right.
This commission and its members probably don't need more work assigned to them, but in some instances, and I don't know how you determine which ones these are. I think a commissioner needs to be well-informed and perhaps invited to some of the local meetings that are going on. The French Glen conversation, and I'd like to have it in detail tomorrow, is a very, very complicated one. And it would have been nice to have been more hands-on earlier. And that's probably my fault, not raising that issue, but
Yeah,
to not have been there makes it more difficult for everybody and for this commission to make a decision too.
yeah, yeah. And I agree. The outreach opportunities are, we have to, the group, not me, not you, but future commission, will have to think about, you know, what those opportunities are and how to make the most of them, because I think that there are those specific issues that you're speaking of. And I know that here I'm now reflecting on these last 8 years, being on the coast, for example, where the coastal parks really define aspects of community life that are high visibility, high priority, because you have little towns that are surrounded by parks on all sides. And so the parks sort of affect the flows of people and the economy and the scenery and the whole experience for people who live there. And so I felt like I could never understand when Commissioner Blasher would say, "Oh, no, nobody's ever contacted me individually about things relating to parks." And I think that's fascinating. I had like 3 people try to contact me on the way to this meeting. Like, and I think it's just the visibility of those parks, and they want to engage. And so there are certain issues that maybe the commission can come forward and work on. But I think that there are just going to be certain places, communities, where there's just a lot of interest in engaging, because it's an important backdrop to all aspects of community life. And that's the feeling I got over the last few years on the coast, is that we're really important in those communities and we're at a very high level. And that's part of why people are always kind of informally trying to reach out. But I think if the commission can sort of find those outreach opportunities in those communities, be creative with what that is and find the right kinds of venues, I think it's really a cool opportunity. And we take the pressure off the future coastal commissioners and other things too. But I think it would be great. I think there'd be a lot of value in that. And it would
Just
help.
today's experience going out and talking to community members who are using that
Yep.
park felt good.
Yeah,
It just felt good. These were people that actually use our park and they have a face and a name and a passion that you can feel.
yeah. I think there's something really valuable about that level of engagement, but it takes time and it takes coordination and resources and so on. So it's not easy, but it's still worth considering what those opportunities may be.
Maybe more invitations from staff to various things when they're out in the field.
Yeah,
or
that's,
meetings
that
and,
might be one of the best
like
ways.
the
to-
road, or the jet boat thing, one example where
That's a
I
good
went down and got to be a part of.
That's right.
300
Pull the
folks, but it's
commissioners into
really
that.
interesting.
Yeah,
It was educational to learn both sides, but also be a face of, and representing the public
Right.
and So I think, you know, if there's more opportunities for things like that where commissioners can get involved or at least invited. It is a lot of time if, you know, you do everything, and certainly don't want to put that burden on staff either, but yeah, I mean, we've talked about, you know, the website and updating with our faces and bio and all that stuff, but you know, if you're out in the community doing stuff, people end up knowing who you are and reaching out, and you know, sometimes they feel more comfortable reaching out to a public commission versus necessarily staff at OPRD, or, you know, depending on their experience, so. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's, I think it's helpful. And then it sounds like as we look to do tours, inviting park users or partners that we're working with is something that would be a helpful way of engaging with community. So we will look to do that. And then the second one, which is very apropos to this time, looking at new commissioner onboarding opportunities, and whether you're reflecting on 8 years, what would have been helpful, or newer, if you have suggestions, yeah, on how we can make commissioner onboarding more successful. I think that's would be really helpful.
I think one of the things that that I've tried to look for, and I think Chris was helping me with this, but just a map of all of the different state parks in my area, in the district. And because I'd like to at least make sure that I've visited them all. and you know, and again, like in terms of the public outreach opportunities, being there is part of that. And I'm not sure that, I don't know that Chris was able to find a map with all of the different, you know, parks.
We
and
can
sites.
Yeah, we can get one by
Totally.
congressional, you would like it by congressional district, so we can
We do it
that.
for legislators all the time too. So
Yeah, that would be really
totally could do
helpful.
that.
And then I
Yeah.
can make that my summer activity.
We want pictures from every one of them with staff.
Yes. The Senate president
Senate
has
president does it.
a map, and he's putting a pin in each one as he's doing it, so.
Oh, that's
Betty,
awesome.
I don't know if you've done it yet, but going to the website, park by park, just is a way to spend hours.
Yeah, I did start that.
Yeah, yeah. But they're alphabetical or some darn thing, or I forget, but you just get lost.
Yeah.
Just the history.
And then I get sucked into a different district and I.
Yeah,
"Oh,
yeah.
I want to go
oh,
to that
yeah,
park.
Look at that, yeah.
We will get you a list.
I have over 900 pictures of him.
Oh, the
Senate
park.
president, he marks them on his map, and he's now color coded him where he's been, and I get a selfie or ussie of him. I think I have 900 pictures now of every park he's been in.
Impressive.
I was given a map when
Yeah.
I came on.
It was in your packet.
Yeah, and
so
I
don't
still have
really-
it, but it's completely outdated.
Yeah, that's an easy fix.
Yeah, and I think we maybe give you a map of the whole
The
state,
whole
but
state.
Yeah.
you're
Identify
for a
yours.
congressional district,
Yep.
we can totally. It's a great suggestion.
There was actually a couple of years ago, a document online. It was like celebrating some significant milestone, and it went through all of the different.
100
state park-
years,
Okay,
100 years.
yeah, I went through that at that point.
And then you wanted to be on the commission.
I did, but I went back to find it and then I couldn't find it. Is it still online?
Oh, look, so the archives, the state archives did a exhibit when it was our 100th celebration that year. They had an exhibit, and so that may have been the archives exhibit that for that year, but I bet we can track down some of that. There's a book that when we did the centennial celebration, there's a book that outlines some of that. And there were a few other exhibits, so I'm sure we can track down the link to that information.
Great, thanks.
We're now identifying which parks are turning 100, because it was the whole system in 2022, sorry. In 2022 was the whole system, but now individual parks are reaching their 100th birthday. Well, if you come up with anything else, please let us know. So the final thing is really just to go back through, and if anyone would like to change any measures, you can either let me know at a different time, or let me know, now, and then we can, we will adopt these during the business meeting. So, you can feel free to let me know, anytime later today.
You can fill all mine in on the right, on the left-hand column.
Okay,
Exceed.
and then I will print them.
So doesn't care anymore.
Just add it.
Whatever.
Okay. And then I will have this as a, attachment for you to review tomorrow.
And your answers don't matter as much as if you're unsure of something that we're doing, it's a great opportunity to have a conversation. So grab any of us to chat through if there's one that you were like, I'm not really sure what that means and you want to ask it here in front of everybody. Yeah, I'm good with that.
But other than that, that was all we had. So you get to see the
Nice
first
job,
picture.
Katie. She was like, oh no, Chris has always done this. And look, that was beautiful. Chris probably watching going, dang, she's doing it better than I did.
Yeah. No, we still miss Chris immensely.
He's not watching.
No, he's out. He may send you a picture of a deer, but
Oh.
that's good. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's it, I think.
all we have.
That's all we've got. So
Yeah.
you enjoy the sunshine and.
For
I think
your
dinner's
100
at
emails.
6:00.
And the mayor will be
I
joining
know.
us for dinner.
Okay.
I think that's the only one I've heard of. I don't think he's got a guitar, a fiddle, or.
Did Eugene?
You could ask.
Judge you if you didn't.
That's right.
It's down.
He's
the
taking-
room's here. Oh, we're getting
And-
here.
Yeah, that'd be perfect,
downstairs.
actually. And then, yeah.
Or is it
I think it's over.
You
Yeah.
could just do a loop.
Yeah.
The dinner, yeah.
There was a,
I
can't remember if it was LCDs or Parks, but for some reason,
there
there's
one-
spending the night
There's a
in
big
Black